And suddenly everyone is
Everyone's
Today we have a special guest from BBC Storyworks and Frosula from our project management team. Oh, he just left. Why?
Oh no, he didn't like our company.
Let me share the link again with him. Yes.
We go.
Yeah, and he's back.
Hi.
Just as we were talking about the wonders of technology, going to work from home, and then it just booted me out.
It failed on us.
That's the joy of technology.
I remember in our second digital talk, we had a huge problem with the voice, and we were thinking, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna call each other and talk through the phone, and people might see and answer through the comment lines? And then we decided to switch it off and take it from the beginning. But it's what it happens when it's a live show.
That's it. Live is at the mercy of fate.
Exactly.
So we're in another digital talk from Hivebreed. Today I have with me Alex Greenswood from BBC Storyworks and Frosula from our project management team. And I'm gonna hand it over to Frosula. And the stage is yours.
Thank you. So hi everyone. Thank you for joining our talk today. And as Dimitri says, we have Alex Greenwood from BBC Storyworks with us today. And basically just wanted to ask Alex firstly, what is BBC Storyworks and what do you do there?
So hi everyone. So BBC Storyworks is it was set up in 2015, and it is the content marketing studio of BBC World News, which is the commercial arm, one of the commercial arms of the BBC. So for those with the BBC, for those who spend a lot of time in the UK and are used to it from the UK angle, there's no advertising, but those who are outside of the UK are much more familiar with it being commercialized and having advertising. So BBC Storyworks was set up in 2015, about the kind of time when content marketing was just starting to take off, and a lot of the other publishers and news broadcasters were starting to kind of get in on the act. So there had always been a commercial production team. Sorry, let me just log off. Sorry, that's a thing of leaving your work. Leaving that, let me just. So it was set up around 2015 to take advantage of content marketing, this sort of booming content marketing. And we work on briefs from agencies and from clients around the world. We've got, I work in the London team, so I work in EMEA region, and then we have teams in New York, Toronto, Delhi, Sydney, Singapore. So we're really kind of spread out all around the world, working with clients and agencies from small to large, and kind of everything in between. And we work principally on two things. There are two main areas. One is working with editorial content, and so big sponsorship deals, and the other is branded content. But at the heart of it is working with brands and agencies to translate a communications objective into content that actually resonates with the BBC audience, right? So that's fundamentally at the heart of what we do. So we will have a brief come in, and we'll work with a brand to tell their story or work with them to define how to tell that story, and then how we can translate that into stories and content that's actually going to work for our audience. And that's the key part of that, which is how do you translate that, and how do you make that interesting enough for someone to give up 5 minutes of their day to read that, right? Because you know, as you all know, the when you're online, just getting that attention and getting people to be genuinely interested, that's really, really important. So that's kind of fundamental. So yeah, so Storyworks, we work on fundamentally those kind of two key areas, really.
And also, I think there is a really fine line to getting that sweet spot between your target message and the message of your audience, and still do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that is fundamentally the most sometimes difficult, certainly can be challenging, but it is the most important area, right? Because you're working with clients or with brands or whoever, and you know they will have a marketing team who, you know, they clearly, you know, they have their objectives, and it's about how you guide and mold that into something which is going to work for their sort of target audience on our platforms, right? And that process, so as my role as a content strategist, is to respond to briefs with ideas that will do exactly that. So that will translate those communication objectives into content. And yeah, so I work across London agencies. I work with Dubai, in Africa. So lots of a big range of different of different clients and stuff. So yeah, an interesting mix.
Okay, so now that the majority of the world is in a lockdown, how do you see stories being developed?
So yeah, and this is an interesting one, and one that I spend many hours of my day discussing at the moment. And I guess if you split it into two ways of looking at this, the first is creative or strategy, and the second is production, right? How you actually make these stories and the content. So the first is from a creative and a strategy point of view. The first thing, you just can't ignore what's happening, right? Like, it sounds weird, you know, almost every conversation that you have at the moment, I imagine 90%, 95% of those conversations will be about what's happening in the pandemic, and it's touched every area of our life. And so I think right at this particular moment, it's impossible to not, but that raises significant challenges, right? Because if you're going to mention it, you need to do it in a way that's sensitive and that is mindful of what's happening, because you don't want to be seen to be, you know, I don't want to corona washing, or, you know, but you don't want to be seen to be taking advantage of it, right? So that's a really difficult process to get right. And we can kind of come on to talking about it, because it has a lot to do with who you are as a company and a brand, and like how you approach that, and should you approach that, you know, that's the other thing, you know, how you kind of, what's your entry point into that. So that's a real creative challenge and a strategic challenge. But it's certainly something which needs to be upfront, and you need to be having that conversation, because if you ignore it, that looks weird. You know, it just can't. You know, it looks like
it's like you're living in your own bubble.
It looks like you're in a bubble, right? And you know, and everyone, it's just be sort of bizarre. So the second then is production, right? And this is a really interesting thing. So because we come from sort of BBC and this kind of history and sort of legacy of long form filmmaking and film and TV, we think video is something that we do a lot of. And when this kind of happened, and we started having travel bans, and you know, we couldn't get crews around, and lots of sort of difficult situations with crews around the world, and you know, getting people home, we were kind of like, oh, what are we going to do? This is, you know, how are we going to carry on responding to stuff? But actually, when you start to think about it, and we did a lot of work kind of working out what we could do, you know, you can still do 90% of production remotely, you know, whether it's even, I mean, written content. I mean, written content, digital builds, podcasts. There's a whole ton of stuff that we can do, but it's also, there are some challenges. Things will maybe take a bit longer, or they won't be as easy as they would have been.
Yeah.
But there's still loads of ways that you can produce content, and that's where being adaptable, and this is something which has been talked about a lot, I think is so important, and adjusting how you might do things, and not thinking how you did it a month ago or 6 months ago, but about how you can do it now. And that's like a level of pragmatism which I think everyone is starting to kind of feel that you need, and that's where people need to trust each other and be like, if we're going to work with you, if we're client X and we're going to work with the BBC, like, we trust you to find us a way to tell these stories in a way that's going to work for right now. And so podcasts is something we're talking a lot about, social video, mixed media stuff, using archive, trying to get contributors to film themselves, working with artists, working with illustrators, lots of writers, lots of written content. There's tons of amazing people who are just sitting at home, just waiting for work. That's the thing. There's still so many people there. It's just about engaging with them on the right, on the right project. So, for me, I really want to make sure that we're still able to, particularly the kind of, the creative industries, people who are working freelance, still being able to, because everything's symbiotic, right? Everything, you can't have one without the other. So I think, that's a really big thing.
Sorry, Frusula. I wanted to ask Alex, do you think brands during a lockdown mode could be more flexible with their guidelines or their structures in terms of communication in favor of creating content to be more relevant and authentic?
So I think they need to think about the end user, right? So, you're starting to see, this is the exact example, right? What we're doing right now is the example of you guys, but identifying how you can help people in this situation, right? So these kind of talks might either inspire someone or help someone, and this is where, when you start to think about what you can do, we're seeing, we're starting to respond to a lot of pitches now with content on, the future of work, how you can be more resilient, what you can do to work better from home, or, these are the kind of things that people are looking for now, right? So adjusting how the things that you might have, again, not thinking what you would have done a month ago, but thinking what you're going to do now and responding to it, right? And so if that's the type of content which helps people to have, a bit of a better time at home. One thing I was just talking about earlier is, doing little bits with, artists and having stuff for kids to do at home, right? Little clips, with, did you know that you can do a print with this? And with, it might sound fairly, not that interesting, but if you scale that up and you start to create content that's going to genuinely add value, and that always gets banded around, like adding value to people's lives, but that's truer now than it ever was, right? Because you really are sitting at home just looking for stuff to do.
We have a client in the wellness and fitness industry. They do. They do body transformations, and the biggest trend right now is live streaming with workouts. And the amazing thing is that clients asked for a full version of a workout with nutrition and a program. So he launched the full program, and now he can serve his clients online. So through his challenge, he created a new vertical.
And that's a great idea, and that's the fitness and well-being, and that whole industry is the perfect example. It's so important at the moment for people to get, to stay physically well and mentally healthy, and that is exactly the type of stuff. Getting 20 minutes of doing a bit of exercise. I think I was on a call this morning with one of my colleagues, and she was saying, Nike and Adidas are obviously doing lots of stuff with lots of athletes who are, you know, if you're a professional tennis player and you can't travel the world and compete in lots of tournaments, well, you know, potentially doing a 15-minute how-to video might significantly improve quite a lot of people's time spent in lockdown, basically. So yeah, that's a great example. Fitness and, you know, fitness and well-being, you know, and doing everything online, I think is a great, yeah, that's the exact example.
Yeah. And I think what's really important right now is that people just take action. So it doesn't really matter if the quality of your production is not as it used to be or how you expected it to be, as long as you get it out there.
Yeah, exactly. This morning I was actually just writing something for getting contributors to film stuff with their phones at home. You know, this is the, you know, these webinars, everyone is so used to these Zoom, you know, within like a week, everyone was suddenly used to being, you know, to speaking to people. And so, you know, I love high-end production. It's great, but you know, there's a time and a place for that. And right now, actually, people just want ideas. You know, how can they, you know, cooking, exercise, art, music, you know, whatever it is, you know, whatever people are into, right? Like people just want some ideas to help them, and that's where these, I just think, yeah, if it's filmed on someone's phone, so be it, you know.
Yeah. So another question I had was, in such uncertain times, do you think that the storytelling marketing approach will help strengthen a brand?
Yes, with a caveat. So yes, in the sense that it really helps to humanize people, right, and brands, because you're able to, like we were just saying, you might be able to provide you know, a little mini series on things that you can do with kids at home, right? Great. You know, or exercise, great. But that's where you have to be really careful to not be seen to being taking advantage of a situation, right? So yes, it can, but it has to be done. You have to think about it, you know, and this is where working, you know, what you work with an agency, you work with a, you know, you speak to other people and you sense check your ideas and you speak about people in the real world, you know, not just the industry, you know, you actually go on, you know, and like those are so important, because, you know, otherwise you don't want to be seen to be jumping on a bandwagon, or, you know, but that really is about balance, and no one knows for sure what is exactly the right thing to do, but fundamentally you just have to think, is what you're doing useful, and you know, is it fair, is it a fair representation of who you are, right? If you were I don't know, if you're doing something which just seems like so outside, you know, the classic example is before this all happened, obviously we had a lot of stuff about sustainability, right? And you would get a brief from someone who is definitely not from a very sustainable, you know, but then the 0.5% of their business which is sustainable, and then that's all they want to talk about, right? But everyone knows that there's this like huge other bit with the rest of their business. So that's about thinking, you know, is what you're doing, are you actually genuine about it? And that's, you know, and that's a hard call to make, but that I would say is the caveat around that. So yes, it can be good, but being honest about, are you doing, you know, why are you doing this, and is it a fair representation?
And there's definitely a line that shouldn't be crossed, I guess.
Yeah, so this is, you know, really it's hard to say where that line is, but you know, it is something which I would say is when you lose sight of what you're actually trying to do. You know, are you trying to shoehorn in a message over actually at a time where people are very sensitive to these kind of things at the moment? So yes, there is a line, but it's very difficult to say where it is.
Yeah.
You know, but yes, there definitely is.
I think it's challenging. It's challenging because storytelling starts with soft metrics and eventually goes into more, let's say, value-adding metrics, whether this is actual engagement or sentiment on the brand, or sales, or growing of the following base of an audience. And it's challenging because if you begin top funnel, you cannot really know if you don't experiment, if you don't see how people respond.
No, and so but that is then thinking about your funnel, right? And thinking about, yeah, make sure you've got your your lower funnel stuff, your more direct stuff, but just make sure it's balanced. Don't just make sure it's all kind of working together, right? So if you've got one message, make sure it's all aligned across each one, and that ultimately is going to be the marker of, if it's really difficult to align that message with all areas of the funnel, then that it fundamentally might not be that true. But and that's where, so when when we come to there's questions of how you actually identify what that brand story is, right? That's when, if you realize you got it wrong in the first place, that's when you start, if you pick something that isn't actually very true, that's when you end up not being able to do that later on. And so when you talk about your funnel, you suddenly be like, oh, we've got this really nice bit at the top, and and then it doesn't make any sense here. And so that mix, but that's where agencies are great, because they can help with that.
Yeah. So for brands that aren't working with agencies, it can be a bit overwhelming to kind of identify what the story of their brand is.
Yeah.
So if you could give 3 steps, what would they be?
So I would say, I don't know if this totally answers your question, but it's how I do it. And so I don't know if this is so the one thing you can't forget is that your brand fits into a marketplace, and in that marketplace is going to be it's going to be people, right? And so for me, those 3 steps are thinking about, first of all, what is your brand? Who do you represent? Why? What's your reason for being, right? How does that compare to the rest of them? Because actually, as you start to look, you might think, no, actually, we're not like that. We are, we're more like this. We're more so. And then you start to think about your audience, right? And it's not until you start to see how those 3 things come together that you can start to kind of identify that. Because it gets, otherwise, if you try and do it in isolation, no brand exists in isolation. And I think that's the hardest thing, because if you just try and think, who are we? What do we stand for? It becomes
restrictive.
It becomes too esoteric. It always comes back to the same thing, which is like, we need to be authentic, or we need to be, and that's true, right? Like, you do, I'm not arguing with that, but like, it becomes a very kind of esoteric conversation. Whereas when you start to think about how you actually fit into people and place, I think that starts to become more apparent, right? And then you can actually start to think where you fit into all of that. And once you get those 3 things, you can start to better identify what your story, what actually makes you genuinely different from other people is. Or other brands. I think that's does that answer? I don't know if that is, but that's how I kind of think about it, I guess.
Yeah. The brand kind of needs to understand who they are and make sure that they actually are that thing that they're saying they are.
So,
that makes
sense. I feel like once the amount of time, often, so the classic example will be, we'll get a briefing, they'll be like, well, we're brand X, and we've got this trait, and this trait. And I'm like, yeah, I've had a brief from 3 other competitors, and they've all said the same thing, right? Like, that's not who you are. It might be, but it doesn't make you any different. And that is when they haven't, in my opinion, they haven't thought enough about the other elements. Because once you start to think about those, are you actually, because it's always relative, right? Like, the way in which you're asking, like, how you're perceived by people, which is totally subjective. And that perception will be based on how people their perception of other brands around them, right? Or other people, or whatever it is, right? So until you see how you fit into that, you don't really have an understanding of how people perceive you. So that, I think, is the thing that is often lost. And otherwise, if you just kind of go down this route of just asking who am I, what do I stand for, like, beyond being sort of Aristotle or Plato, it becomes, do you know what I mean? It becomes pretty hard. So that, I would say, and that makes it easier as well, because you can literally draw it out, right? So you have those 3 areas, and you can start to actually map it all out and put things down. And that's where I always start. And then you come to an idea or a platform that then allows you to start to think about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Alex, Cyprus's economy is hugely supported by hospitality and tourism.
Mm-hmm.
And now, after the pandemic, we're going to have a lot of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
What would be your biggest advice for big and small companies working into the hospitality and tourism industry?
It's a tough question. I think for me, what's become apparent here is there was a lot of talk on kind of slow travel and this idea, the sustainability and the number of flights a year. So everything was starting to come under pressure anyway, right? And that I think now has been massively accelerated by what's happening because people literally cannot fly. So I think the big question is going to be how if in the following years, if in the next few years, if people aren't flying as much, or they're going to be more critical about where they go, right? So you might only have one holiday a year. So it's actually understanding how or why people want to go to your place. Either it's a country, so this is sort of a country branding thing, but also like if you work in hospitality, what are the experiences? What are what motivates people to go there? And I think that's gonna be something that's gonna change quite a lot. And thinking about, I think international travel will become less frequent. I'm not an expert. I don't know, but that's my hunch. I think people will still travel. People are never going to not want to stop traveling. People are going to do it in a different way. And I think a whole different set of values is going to come in for international travel. So whereas before it was probably a lot about, for a lot of people, it was about going about, as going away as much as they could, right? And so it became about cost and what you got on the your holiday. Whereas now I think if people are traveling less frequently, they might have a different set of criteria that they need to tick before they plan to go somewhere. So that, I think, understanding what's going to motivate people in 2020, 2021, 2022, that's going to be the key. And my hunch it's going to be on a different set of values, which are going to be much more about a deeper cultural connection. And that is where, you're not coming back round, but that's where content and stories and stuff is going to be so important, because people are going to have to almost feel like they've been somewhere before they've gone there, right? Yeah. And how you balance that and how you do that is going to be really tricky. But again, learning from a situation like this, the over-reliance on, or on video, for example, to where you fly somewhere, you let the destination do all the work, right? You take beautiful shots, amazing, But now we can't do that, right? So how do you capture the essence of somewhere without going somewhere? And that, I think, is going to be the heart of how, particularly from a communications point of view, is going to be what people will have to kind of adjust to. So without wanting to say the new normal, because I know that's what everyone's saying at the moment, but it's true, right? And so that for me is going to be the role of communications, and particularly for anything which is involving content, because it is a deeper form, but it will have to be richer, and people have to think about it, and what those values are is going to be a really interesting piece, probably a very interesting research piece, right? I don't know, but like that would be my take on it, if that will make sense.
Yeah. Every country and every kind of company in hospitality is going to have to really give people a reason to want to be there and experience everything.
Yeah, and I don't say this lightly, because it's, if I was running a hospitality business, that sounds like a ton of work, right? Like, you already work hard enough as it is, and now you've got to go and make people want to go there even more. That's I really sympathize. People work so hard anyway in hospitality and tourism industries, and then to have to go and have an extra thing of trying to convince people to go. But that, I think, will be one of the repercussions of all of this. People will just people will fly less, but whether it's for sustainability or for this, I think it'll all kind of go into that mix. And so I think people will become more critical when they choose. I don't mean critical in a they're not going to be critical of a place, but they're going to think more critically about where they want to go, I think.
And also safety. They'll be thinking about safety more than they did before.
I think it's going to be in the top of the priority list now.
You may not want to travel to certain places.
And that's going to be, I mean, I'm now kind of talking as a, but like that, the speed at which things will change over the next couple of years, and places might suddenly flare up again or not, and how that's managed, I don't know. That kind of short-term stuff is going to be really difficult. But people are never, fundamentally, people are never going to want to stop seeing the world, right? Like that's just that's a fact.
Part of our identity or our DNA.
In the same way that people are never going to want to stop like reading stories. It's just about it's just a vehicle for information, right? Like, and it's just about thinking about what that what that vehicle is today or what it is tomorrow.
To me it feels like, as a professional opinion, that the brands in hospitality that will be able to tick off the objections from the list of a traveler by using immersive storytelling without being in your face, they are the ones that are going to win this battle. And then they're also the ones that they're going to build very strong emotional bonds with the travelers.
I'd say that's a fair summation, really. And it's going to be tricky, but it's I really do, I fundamentally think those are two human, deep set human desires, right? Wanting to explore the world and wanting to understand the world through stories, right? And those two things go very well together. It's just about working out how to do it effectively.
How to connect the dots.
Yes, exactly.
Great.
Do we have any questions?
I was just about to check. I don't see any questions apart from emojis.
Emojis are the new language.
Exactly. That's fine for me. People can send me emojis. That's fine.
If anyone has any questions, right now would be the time to ask.
But I am just sitting at home for the next 4 weeks at least. So let's have more questions. You just send them.
We can forward it to Alex.
Exactly.
Cool.
Great.
So I think we had a very constructive talk.
Yeah.
It was very valuable and insightful. You give us a very good understanding of what BBC Storyworks does and what will be the future of storytelling for brands during and post-pandemic mode. I really hope this thing ends soon. But most of all, I hope that brands and companies and storytellers continue being authentic and continue connecting the dots between their needs and their audience's needs to create compelling stories. Because at the end of the day, we love to hear a good story, even if it's going to sell something or if it's going to evoke an emotion for us. I think it's in our nature to hear stories and connect with stories.
Yeah. I agree.
Alex, are there any closing words you would like to make before?
No, only that I hope I can come back to Cyprus soon. That's I had a great time. And thanks so much for this, guys. It's lovely. It's lovely to speak to people when we're all in this funny state.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for accepting to have this talk.
No worries. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great.
Wish you all the best. We wish you to stay safe, stay home, and all the best for the future, and keep sharing stories with meaning and love.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.